Sometimes it only takes a single second to rewrite a lifetime. The phone buzzed, splitting the silence. I almost didn't answer. Midnight had always been sacred, the hour where dreams slept. The hour Darcy and I would lie on our backs, fingers twined, inventing futures in the ceiling cracks. We hadn't done that in years. But I still remembered. So I answered. And for one aching moment I forgot how much I had started to fear her smile. It lit up the screen, familiar, casual, as if I wasn't slowly losing her cell by cell. Her laugh rang out bright and glassy, echoing in a room I couldn't see. I smiled back instinctively even though I knew she couldn't see me. Then she turned. It was a simple motion. She shifted, laughed again, and kissed him. Not a clumsy, drunken peck. A kiss that was practiced. Deep. Her arm slid around his neck like it belonged there. Like it had always belonged there. I watched, frozen, my thumb hovering over the red end button. But I didn't hang up. I didn't speak. I just watched. The man touched her cheek, the way I used to when she had nightmares. She smiled like the world made sense again. And in the sick glow of my phone, her betrayal inked itself into my skin. Permanent. Irrevocable. I stared, not even breathing, as she pulled away and whispered something I couldn't hear. Her voice had changed, lighter, younger. Like the girl I fell in love with had never left. But she had. I realized that now. She left when her phone stopped ringing after midnight. When her laughter became private. When her hugs started to feel like goodbyes with better PR. I didn't know who he was. But that didn't matter. What mattered was this. Everything she told me this week, the headaches, the overtime, the canceled plans, all of it had collapsed under one accidental call. I wondered if she pocket-dialed me. Or if something deeper wanted me to know. Maybe a mistake. Maybe a message. Maybe both. The call lasted 42 seconds. 42 seconds to end 6 years. I stared at the screen even after it went black, like if I touched it hard enough it would explain itself. Tell me I misunderstood. That it wasn't what it looked like. That maybe she tripped and fell into someone's mouth. But it was what it looked like. It felt like falling through a floor that was never there to begin with. That night I didn't sleep. I didn't cry either. I watched the shadows crawl across the walls and wondered how long they'd been there, how long I'd ignored them, hoping they were just tricks of the light. I replayed her voice in my head over and over. Laughter used to mean safety. Now it felt like a blade. I still remember the way she said my name during our vows. Like it was sacred. Untouchable. I wondered if she whispered his name the same way now. I never said a word to her about the call. Not that night. Not the next day. Some betrayals don't scream. They whisper for years. But something in me had shifted. Quietly. Permanently. Because sometimes the most dangerous kind of betrayal isn't the one you see coming. It's the one that smiles at you, kisses your cheek, and calls you just late enough to ruin you. I didn't scream. I didn't throw the phone. I listened to the death of us in silence. The call ended without me touching a thing. A dull click and then nothing. No excuses. No rewind. Just the heavy, pressing silence of an ending I hadn't agreed to. I sat there, in the dark, heartbeat slowing to something cold and mechanical. Like a machine shutting down, one vital system at a time. The air around me thickened, heavy with something I didn't have a name for yet. Logic staggered in, late to the scene, trying to fix what my heart already knew. Maybe it was old footage. Maybe it was a prank. Maybe it meant nothing at all. I wanted so badly to believe it. But the details cut sharper than any excuse could dull. Darcy had worn those earrings this morning. Tiny, gold, heart-shaped, a gift I had tucked into her stocking last Christmas because she once said she loved things that stayed close. I remembered how she had smiled when she unwrapped them. I remembered how she had leaned across the table to kiss me, whispering, "Perfect." Now, those same hearts winked at me from the glow of betrayal. Dangling against the throat she offered to someone else. 1,000 tiny things rushed back to me, clamoring for attention. The sudden new perfume that made the car smell foreign. The evening spent in the guest room claiming she needed to catch up on sleep. The muted smiles, the careful phrasing as if love were a project she planned to outsource. They had all been trying to warn me. I just wasn't ready to listen. I placed the phone carefully on the coffee table like it was something breakable. Sacred even now. The screen still faintly reflected the hollow outline of my face. I didn't scream. I didn't throw it. I listened to the death of us in silence. And somewhere deep inside, beneath the horror, beneath the rage, a tiny, detached part of me admired the precision of it all. How betrayal didn't shatter like glass, but settled over you like ash. Quiet. Relentless. Inevitable. I leaned back against the couch, the leather cool against my skin, and closed my eyes. For a moment, I imagined what it would feel like to wake up from this, to shake my head and laugh at my own paranoia. but the earrings still dangled behind my eyelids. Gold hearts. Still close. Only not to me. Outside, the night pressed harder against the windows, the wind scratching at the frames like something trying to get in. Or maybe something trying to warn me to get out. It wasn't rage that stirred first. It was something quieter, meaner. Clarity. Because love doesn't die in explosions. It dies like this. In small, glittering betrayals. In heart-shaped lies. In the stillness before the storm. Our home wasn't a home anymore. It was a crime scene. I got home before she did. The door creaked open into a house that no longer recognized me. Same furniture. Same faint ticking of the clock on the mantel. Same shoes by the door, hers just a little crooked like always. But it wasn't ours anymore. It wasn't anything anymore. It was a crime scene. Only no police would come. No yellow tape would save me from what was already dead. The air was thick with her perfume, stronger than usual, cloying and sweet, like she'd tried to scrub herself clean and ended up marinating in the guilt instead. It clung to the walls, the couch, the very air I breathed. A cheap apology sprayed from a bottle. I walked through the living room, careful not to touch anything, as if the walls themselves might accuse me of being complicit. Maybe I was. Maybe I'd been for a long time. Her phone was half buried between the couch cushions, screen glowing dimly like a dying star. Careless. Or confident. I wasn't sure which hurt more. I picked it up without thinking. It unlocked with a simple swipe, no passwords, no barriers. As if the phone itself was tired of lying for her. The messages hit me first. Not angry ones. Not frantic, lust-fueled texts. No, these were worse. Inside jokes. Plans for the weekend. Photos of places she said she visited with friends. Pictures of him kissing her forehead while she wore my hoodie. Videos of her singing in the car, off-key, laughing, her voice the soundtrack to someone else's memories. They didn't hide it. They celebrated it. Month after month of a life I wasn't invited to. Month after month of being a ghost in my own story. My fingers hovered over the screen. For a moment, I thought about copying it all, sending it to myself, building an archive of every betrayal like a lawyer gathering evidence. But what was the point? I already knew the verdict. I closed the gallery carefully, the way you might close a casket. As if handling the ashes of someone I once loved. The phone slipped from my hands onto the coffee table with a soft thud, face down. I sat back and stared at it, half expecting it to pulse or breathe, a living thing now that it had exhaled the truth. The house creaked. The clock ticked. The world kept turning. And in that moment, surrounded by the ordinary debris of our so-called life, half-empty coffee cups, her sweater thrown across a chair, the faint imprint of her body still pressed into the couch cushions, I realized something awful. I hadn't lost her tonight. I'd been living in the ruins for a long, long time. I just finally found the map. Some wars aren't fought with words. They're fought by walking away. The lock clicked just after 1 a.m. Darcy stumbled in, stinking of cheap wine and stranger's breath, her laughter cracking too loud against the quiet. She dropped her purse on the floor, missing the hook by a wide margin, and kicked off her heels without looking at me. I watched from the couch. Silent. Still. When she finally noticed me, she blinked, like seeing me was a detail she had almost forgotten. Her smile spread too fast, too eager, like a child caught sneaking candy. Girls' night, she said brightly, tossing the words like confetti. You should have come. You would have hated it. She swayed slightly, mascara smudged at the corners of her eyes, perfume curling off her skin in heavy waves. A stranger wrapped in my wife's body. I smiled back at her. Not warmly. Just enough to keep her blind. She giggled, leaned down, kissed my forehead, a lazy afterthought, and disappeared toward the bedroom. Her footsteps thudded unevenly on the stairs, each one hammering another nail into the coffin of who we used to be. I stayed sitting there long after the house fell quiet again. Long after her lies settled into the walls. Inside me, something ancient and buried cracked open. Not anger. Not sorrow. Just the cold, heavy finality of knowing it was over. Not just tonight. Not just because of the man on the other side of that call. It had been dying quietly for months. I had simply refused to call time of death. I stood, walked upstairs, and packed a single bag. Nothing precious. Nothing heavy. Clothes, keys, wallet. The essentials for someone learning how to be no one again. My wedding ring caught the light as I pulled it off. It felt lighter than I expected. Like it had been ready to leave too. I left it on the dresser where she could find it. A small, gleaming ghost of a life she threw away. No note. No explanation. Some things don't deserve a goodbye. I closed the door behind me, soft as a breath. The car engine rumbled low, a heartbeat in the stillness. I pulled out of the driveway without looking back, without wondering if she would wake up and notice the empty space beside her. The city lights flickered and then faded in the rearview mirror, swallowed by open highway and night. And in that endless stretch of dark, I found a new kind of silence. Not the silence of anger, not the silence of despair, the silence of freedom, the silence of a war I had chosen not to fight. Some endings aren't battles. They're just a man walking away while the house burns quietly behind him. Freedom isn't clean. It's jagged like ripping stitches from skin. Freedom wasn't a sunrise. It wasn't a deep breath and a clean break. It was blood under my fingernails. It started with the accounts, the invisible tendrils that still knotted us together. Bank, credit cards, insurance, little things you don't think about when you're busy promising forever. I severed them all, one by one, with the precision of a surgeon who knew the patient was already dead. A few clicks here, polite call there, a quiet visit to the courthouse, papers filed without ceremony. Updating my emergency contact at work felt strangely final. A name erased, a life reclassified. Single, no longer next of kin. Each click, each signature, carved another chunk out of the carcass of our marriage. It wasn't clean. It wasn't painless. It was jagged like ripping stitches from skin you once thought would heal. And still, I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just worked. Efficient. Methodical. The way you handle a dying animal you once loved. With sadness so deep and quiet it almost looks like mercy. When the paperwork was done, the void came. Not grief. Not regret. Just silence. A silence shaped exactly like the space where she used to exist. Her text came first. Hey, are you okay? Where are you? Please talk to me. It buzzed across the screen, frantic and clumsy, like she thought she still had the right. I stared at it. A digital ghost. An afterthought from someone who had already moved on before the door even closed behind me. The call came next, ringing sharp against the hush of my borrowed motel room. Her name lit up the screen like an accusation. I let it buzz and rattle itself to death. No answer. No reaction. I muted her, blocked her, deleted the contact altogether. I owed her nothing but absence. Some people mistake forgiveness for weakness. They think silence is surrender. But sometimes, silence is the sharpest knife of all. Sometimes, the loudest thing you can say is nothing. And in that empty motel room, with its peeling wallpaper and humming vending machine outside the door, I realized something brutal and true. She hadn't just lost me. She had lost the version of me who would have stayed. She searched for me. She begged the void she created. Weeks passed, not in a blaze of closure, but in slow, grinding days that tasted like dust and unfinished sentences. I lived small, cheap motels, cash payments, a borrowed name for the mailbox at the end of a dirt road. The kind of life you slip into when you don't want to be found, when disappearing feels more natural than breathing. But even ghosts leave shadows. Even ghosts get glimpses of the world they left behind. Through the accounts I kept open, skeletal remains left untouched for legal reasons only, I saw her searching. Photos, posts, public cries that tasted of regret, private messages slick with desperation. Where are you? Please answer. I made a mistake. I didn't mean for it to be like this. Please come home. Funny. When I was there, she wanted everyone but me. Now that I was gone, she wanted the ghost of the man she buried. She wasn't looking for the real me. Not the man who sat alone while she dressed up for strangers. Not the man who swallowed doubts until they rotted into silence. No, she wanted the idea of me. The easy forgiveness. The familiar weight. The hand that would catch her when she fell off whatever pedestal she built out of lies. But the real me was already ash. Already scattered. Every plea she posted, every regret she whispered into the void, only proved what I already knew. She didn't miss me. She missed not being the villain in someone else's story. I watched without responding. Not because I didn't feel anything, but because the feeling had evolved into something she couldn't reach. Pity, maybe. Detached sorrow. Like you feel watching a bird crash into a window it never saw coming. Sometimes, love doesn't turn into hate. turns into nothing at all. I let her search. I let her scream into the digital dark. But I stayed silent, because the version of me who would have answered didn't survive her. He was the first casualty of the war she pretended wasn't happening. And no matter how many times she begged the void, no matter how many apologies she stitched into late-night messages, she was never going to find him again. You don't resurrect what you kill. You just learn to live with the ghost. Sometimes closure is pretending the grave was always empty. It ended not with a bang, but with the scratch of a pen on cheap motel stationery. Under a fake name, in a room that smelled like mildew and hopelessness, I signed the final divorce papers. No courtroom drama. No tears clawing down cheeks. No last-ditch confessions whispered across wooden tables. Just ink bleeding into paper, like blood draining from something that had already been dead for months. The envelope sat heavy in my lap afterward, sealed and ready to be mailed to a future that no longer had space for the name we once shared. I stared at it for a long time, half expecting it to speak, to explain itself. But it was just paper now. Paper and silence. I hadn't packed much when I left her. Just a duffel bag of basics and a battered photo album we'd never bothered to finish. It was the album I pulled out next. The cover was cracked, soft at the corners from hands that once held it too often. Inside, half-frozen smiles stared up at me. Darcy grinning under fireworks. Darcy laughing in a too-big sweatshirt. Us, drunk on cheap wine, feet tangled under an autumn tree. Memories curated carefully enough to almost forget the erosion that came after. I thumbed through it page after page, feeling nothing. No warmth, no rage, not even sadness. The past had fossilized. I was only touching bones now. I carried the album outside to the crumbling parking lot, under a night sky stitched with broken stars. A metal trash can sat near the curb, dented and rusted. It would do. One flick of a lighter, a breath of hesitation, and the first page caught fire. The flames spread hungrily, curling through our faces, our promises, our paper-thin forever. The album crumpled and hissed, bleeding black into the night, smoke rising like broken vows climbing back toward a heaven that didn't want them. I stood there and watched until the last page fell into itself, just a smear of ash and melted glue. Closure didn't feel like healing. It didn't feel like triumph. It didn't even feel like revenge. Felt like nothing. A dull, hollow ache where something used to live. An empty grave, no headstone, no eulogy. And maybe that was the first mercy. Not the idea that I could rebuild. Not the hope that I would be happy again. But the simple, brutal truth that some endings don't need to be survived. They just need to be accepted. I walked back into the motel, the stink of smoke clinging to my jacket, the night folding in behind me like a door that would never open again. There was no funeral, no goodbye, just a man, a signature, and a fire nobody would ever know existed. Sometimes closure is pretending the grave was always empty, and sometimes it's realizing it never deserved a tombstone to begin with. When everything is broken, you get to decide what the pieces become. A new town, a nowhere town, the kind of place where nobody asked why you walked into the diner alone, or why you didn't leave a forwarding address. I rented a small apartment above an antique store. Warped floors, creaky pipes, windows that rattled when the wind picked up. It wasn't much. It was perfect. No ghosts followed me here, only the ones I chose to carry. I didn't fill the space with furniture. Just a mattress on the floor, a battered dresser, and a second-hand easel I found at a yard sale. Oil paints and bruised canvases soon crowded the corners, colors bleeding out of me when words refused. Hiking boots worn thin on unfamiliar trails became my therapy. Step after step, mile after mile, I burned through old anger and older love, letting them leak out into the dirt, into the trees, into rivers that didn't know my name. I didn't try to forget her. That's what nobody tells you. You don't erase wounds. You let them rot naturally, like dead leaves sinking into soil. You stop picking at them long enough for them to become something else. Something softer, something survivable. Sometimes I'd catch a flash of memory, her laugh, her hand brushing mine, and it would hit like a shard of glass. But I didn't flinch. I let it pass through. Because pain, too, loses interest when you stop feeding it. The fortress around me grew, but not the way it had in the early days, brittle, angry, all sharp edges. No, this was different. Every ignored call. Every unopened letter forwarded from the lawyer's office. Every chance to reopen old wounds that I simply let die on the vine. Each one was a brick. Not to wall the world out. Not to keep love from ever finding me again. But to build something stronger inside. A place where I didn't have to fear my own reflection. A place where trust wasn't a weakness, but a gift offered carefully, deliberately. A place where I was enough even if no one else ever said it out loud. Sometimes healing isn't about finding something new. It's about honoring the broken pieces enough to shape them into something unrecognizable. A life. A fortress. A man no longer willing to be set on fire just to keep someone else warm. One day, without fanfare, I forgot her voice. It didn't happen during some grand revelation. No lightning bolt. No tearful epiphany on a rainy street corner. It happened somewhere between a sunrise hike and a late-night painting session when the world was soft around the edges and I wasn't trying so hard to survive it anymore. I realized with a strange, distant curiosity that I couldn't remember the sound of Darcy's laugh. Not really. Not the texture of it. Not the way it used to crack at the edges when she was genuinely happy. It was just gone. Her voice, once so familiar it lived under my skin, had faded like a song I hadn't heard in years. Her scent, that heady mix of vanilla and something sharper, once haunting me through grocery aisles and crowded sidewalks, now smelled like stranger's perfume. The grief hadn't left with a bang. It hadn't clawed its way out of me, screaming for attention. It faded the way everything mortal does, slowly, imperceptibly, like footprints swallowed by the tide. She wasn't a wound anymore. She was scar tissue. A pale, rough place I didn't feel the need to hide. And the strangest part, the part that almost felt like betrayal, was how natural it was. How easy. I didn't throw a party. I didn't call anyone. I didn't even stop painting. I just paused, brush dangling from my fingers, and sat in the stillness for a moment. The shift was so quiet I almost missed it. I had carried her absence like a stone in my chest for so long that when it dissolved, I didn't know whether to mourn the loss of the pain or to celebrate the absence of it. Maybe both. Maybe neither. Because healing isn't always joyful. Sometimes it's just silence. A quiet acceptance that the worst has already happened and somehow, impossibly, you're still breathing. I dipped my brush back into the paint and pressed it to the canvas, leaving a bright, defiant streak of color against the blankness. I didn't think of her again. Not as a person. Not as a ghost. Not as anything. Just a chapter closed. A name unwritten. And for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, my heart felt light enough to lift itself out of the wreckage. Loving someone else had cost me everything. Loving myself gave it all back. It wasn't some epic moment. No crowds. No dramatic soundtrack swelling in the background. Just me, alone, standing at the top of a nameless hill while the last burn of sunlight folded into the earth. The wind was sharp against my face, raw and real, and it felt good, the kind of good you can't fake. The kind you don't need to explain to anyone. I smiled. Not for her. Not for revenge. Not because anyone was watching. For myself. For the boy who once thought love had to hurt to be real. For the man who once bled himself dry trying to be enough for someone who was already gone. I wasn't broken anymore. I wasn't hers. I wasn't even the man she betrayed. The version of me who stayed silent when he should have screamed, gone. The version who begged for scraps of affection, gone. The version who thought being loved meant being chosen last, buried. All that remained was someone new. Someone forged not through rage or bitterness, but through the quiet brutality of starting over. Someone born from the ashes of silence and pride. Someone who didn't need anyone's permission to exist. I chose myself. Not the polished, perfect version I used to pretend to be. Not the man she wanted me to stay. Just me. Flawed. Resilient. Enough. And standing there, with nothing but the wild horizon stretching out before me, I finally understood. Choosing yourself isn't the backup plan. It's the victory. It's the quiet, stubborn miracle of refusing to vanish. And for the first time, without apology, without doubt, that was enough.